My Lords, I too declare my interest as a Vice Chair of the Local Government Association, and I'd like to offer a very warm welcome to Lady Brown of Silvertown and Lord Wilson of wherever it was, Sedgefield, unforgettable, obviously. I was going to point out to the Noble Earl at Lord Leicester that he's not going to beat me in a competition between who has more in common with Lord Wilson, because my grandfather was a miner in South Wales. In fact, he was killed in a mining disaster, the largest there's ever been in Britain. And I also grew up on a council estate until I was 18 years of age, and left home for college. So back to the bill. I'd like to say to the Noble Lady and the Minister that I love so much about this bill. It is ending no-fault evictions. It's helping to protect tenants from damp and mould, and it's making it easier for renters to keep pets. And I 100% support those things. And of course, the government has responded well to suggested amendments, such as stopping excessive demands for rent up front. I'm even hopeful that the Minister might give me a positive response to an amendment which I will table later. It's an amendment that was tabled by my colleague Carla Denyer MP in the other place, which talks about the needs of people with disabilities, both visible and invisible. And it would be absolutely wonderful to get something on the face of the bill to improve the situation for disabled renters in the private rented sector, and to send a message to those landlords who lock them out of the sector that it's not acceptable that so many people struggle to get permission for the most basic of adaptations or face discrimination in renting in the first place. I would say this bill isn't perfect, but it is the kind of legislation that I was hoping this government might put forward. And I'd like to suggest some big ideas about what the government should do next. The big things I would say that are missing, and the main reason why many young people are choosing to vote Green instead of red these days, are rent controls and an end to right to buy. We need a living rent to match the living wage. This will be similar to the living wage scheme we Greens proposed and got the Mayor of London, Ken Livingstone, to agree to 24 years ago. There would be a national commission to decide the living rent with input from local authorities and mayors. It would examine factors like local income in different areas, the size of properties and local market conditions, plus the conditions of the properties themselves. We should not have a situation where an estimated 1 in 10 tenants are spending 60% of their income on rent. With rents going up rapidly year by year, this is not just an issue of a few hotspots. Rents went up by over 3 times the rate of inflation last year, and the question is why? How does that happen? I've heard all the arguments about it being population growth and a shortage of supply, but then you look at the actual figures for the last few decades and find that housing supply is not just keeping pace with household formation, but increasingly outstripping it. The houses have been built, but they have ended up in fewer hands. That is the root of the problem with our housing market. So rents have gone from being 10% of income to an average of around a third of incomes. One clear reason why the brakes have come off rents in the private sector is because of right to buy and the decline in social housing. Rents have risen rapidly, along with the country's benefits bill. If the government wants to increase the supply of housing, then why don't ministers take up the challenge, invest in social housing and build, baby, build? Why don't we have ministers investing in a future of good quality social housing that can't be sold off and can create a decent home for the younger generations who are increasingly worried about the fact that they may never have the security and quality of life that their parents' generation had. The long-term solutions to rising rents are ending the chokehold on supply from greedy developers who are land banking, and dealing with the property speculators who buy ghost flats in London and leave them empty all year. While the government is thinking through what steps it can take to deal with these rich property developers who restrict the housing market to get even richer, ministers can and should act to reform the rental market with sensible and locally sensitive limits on what people can charge. While the inequality of housing has become a huge generation divide, as other noble lords have said already, 11 million people are renting. We have a generation going on 2 generations now who, unless decisive action is taken by this government, will never be able to earn enough to have a mortgage and are straining to afford their rents, not to mention the sharp rise in the number of families with children staying in temporary accommodation for more than 5 years. Now, this bill, it definitely will help. I feel there's no doubt about that. But equally, it doesn't touch the roots of the problem. And I would like to hear from the noble lady, the Minister, about whether or not social housing is a really high priority, because I've asked questions on the issue of housing and I get the response back, ministers talking about affordable housing. I'm not talking about just affordable housing. I care very much about social housing. That's where I grew up for my first 18 years, and I think that other people deserve that as well. So I urge ministers to consider the steps really needed to fix our housing crisis, just as we would all expect from a concerned Labour government.